Perfect. Okay. Hi everyone, wherever you guys may be. So you guys are here for a treat because this is our first like public webinar through Científico Latino. And so you guys are here because you're applying to STEM PhD and or master's programs this upcoming application cycle and after. So yeah, so just to just provide brief introductions to ourselves. So I am Daisy. I go by she, her, hers. I am, it says rising, but I guess the semester's already started. So I'm a fifth year PhD student studying molecular biophysics and biochemistry at Yale. I graduated in 2018 from Johns Hopkins. I majored in biophysics, applied math, and stats. And this is also to show that, I know that a lot of like STEM careers are also nonlinear. So I actually studied evolutionary molecular biology, but more evolutionary biology, if anything. And at this incredible institution, American Museum of Natural History, where truly my research journey began. And then I just switched into biophysics through coursework, exposure to the field. And I did 3 summer internships in college. I took the GRE, but honestly, this was 2018. So at the time, the Grexit movement, we're going to talk about this later. Aníbal's going to elaborate, but I applied to as many PhD app fee waivers as I could just by cold emailing registrars. But I also was simultaneously applying to a lot of industry positions as backup. Okay.
Hey everyone, I'm Aníbal. I go by he, him, his, and I'm a 4th year PhD candidate at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Previous to this, I did a prep program in Case Western Reserve University. This was just after I graduated from University of Puerto Rico, and I realized that I had been rejected by all the graduate schools I applied to in 2018. And therefore, in 2019, after I did the prep program, I got back on track and came to basically this prep. Got to University of Michigan Ann Arbor afterwards. I took the GRE twice, and I did not submit it to any of the 10 schools I applied, and I did take the TOEFL once, and we'll be talking about these tests quite a bit today.
Hi everyone, I'm Yaniris. I'm a first year PhD student at the Immunology department in Harvard. I worked as a tech and lab manager at Johns Hopkins University for 2.5 years. I graduated in 2020 from the University of Puerto Rico Macao, where I majored in biology and microbiology. I had a master's in chemistry, and my research experiences were a little bit all over the place, but I did 1 summer research program, 1 professional development program, and I had 4 years of undergrad research experience at my home institution. And for my grad school application, I did take the TOEFL, but I did not have to take the GRE because the programs that I was applying to, mostly in biomedical sciences and immunology, did not require it. And so I'll be leading this first part of the workshop, and we're going to be talking a little bit about, what is a PhD program in STEM or science. And so all the information that we're going to discuss in this slide is relevant to PhD programs in STEM in the United States. And one of the first things that I just want to get at is that this program is free. Your department will basically cover tuition cost, health insurance, and will provide you with a stipend every month. And also you will be able to be independent, learn to think independently, lead your own project, come up with a design and execute your own experiments. And at the same time, you'll become an expert, right? You will become an expert in your very specific research area, and the work that you do in your PhD will add to novel and relevant knowledge to your field. During this time, you will also develop specific skills, and more importantly, these skills will be what we call transferable skills. And among those, you will have critical thinking skills, time and project management, networking, writing, teaching, and communication skills. And at the end of the day, with the training that you receive in your PhD, you'll be able to pursue any career pretty much. And among those, you can pursue a career in academia where you want to teach or you want to have your own lab, a career in industry, government, consulting, science policy, and science communication, among others. And also, one important thing to think about is your PhD timeline. And I do want to say that this is just to give you a general idea. It really depends on the program you're in and on your own personal journey, because things come up and this might change. But generally, during your first year, pretty much like what I'm doing right now, You will start taking relevant coursework specific to what your PhD program is, and you will also start having different lab rotations. The duration of these rotations might change, and you can look all this up in your program website before even you start to select a program. And at the end of the time, you will join a lab. During your second year, you will still be taking some coursework, will work in your research project at that time, and then during your second to third, and then again this is 1 to 3 because again it depends on the program, but you will be preparing for your qualifying exam, which is a written and or oral examination for you to advance from a PhD student to a PhD candidate. And then after that, it depends on your program again, but some programs you will be required to TA or to teach. You can teach an undergraduate class or a graduate class, that depends. And then at this point, you will also be like further developing your research project. You will be attending workshops and conferences. And by the last year of your PhD, you will be just wrapping up your thesis, defending your thesis, and then applying to jobs and finally graduating. And then one of the biggest questions that you'll probably be thinking as of right now is, how do I choose a PhD program? And there are several things to think about before that, but one of the most important things is, what is your field of interest? You need to select a program that you're interested in and that might be related to your academic background or research that you have done. And this could be anything from immunology, engineering, data science, and so on. And if you're applying to a discipline that is not within your main field, sometimes you'll have to take extra coursework. Just make sure that you, again, go to your program website or talk to your program advisors and directors and figure out if this is something that you need to do beforehand. Again, just a reminder, read all the requirements and make sure that you know that you fulfill all of those before you submit your applications. You don't want to submit your applications and then realize that you didn't get an offer or you didn't get an interview invite because you were missing some requirements. And then the other thing that you might be thinking of is about research labs. So for each program, you could find at least 5 professors that you're potentially interested in working with. A big thing for this is that it is not guaranteed that you will join a particular lab because many things could be going on. The principal investigator or PI might not have the space, might not have the financial support for you, or might be away on a sabbatical. And for this, you can also email a PI that you're passionate about working with and ask if they'll be taking students in that upcoming year. And this is particularly important and required for programs in ecology, evolutionary biology, computer science, and psychology. And this is something that I added because it actually happened to me, but if you find a program that a program application that has an option to name drop any faculty, make sure to at least contact 3 faculty, talk to them, and add those names to your application before you submit your application. It will make you more competitive. It will show that you did your research and so on. And then another important thing is about special programs and researches that your program might have. And if you already have an idea of the career path that you want to pursue after your PhD, or if you're interested in exploring the different areas during your PhD journey, you can look up these things through your program's website and figure out if this is something that you will like to do. And so those things include industry internships, medical classes that you could audit, dual degree opportunities like PhD JD, PhD MBAs, career development programs, and particularly important, I think, for low-income students like me, extra financial support. You want to know if there's anything that your program or your school can do for you financially to support you during your career. You can also look at the teaching opportunities. They call it TA or TAing. Some programs will require you to teach, and for this, you won't really get paid. But there are other programs that you could teach if you wanted to, and at that point, generally the program will pay you if you teach. Like that is, extra money. And then there are other programs that they won't require you to teach, but they have what they call teaching certificates that you can actually apply and then join, and basically you will learn how to give a class, how to come up with a syllabus, and how to prepare a class, and then at the end you will finish with that certificate, and you have that for whatever you might want to do afterwards, whether that is academics or just generally teaching. And then after that, another big thing is location in the community. So for location, find a place where you'll be happy because you will be there for a long time. And if, weather is something that is important to you, you're like, I hate the cold or I hate the heat. That is something to keep in mind whenever you start to make your list of PhD programs that you would like to join. And another point is to keep in mind, how supportive and diverse the community is, not only in your program, but also along the campus, in the building that you're working in, or even in the city and location of the schools. Because sometimes you might be in a building, but there's an environment, there's a culture to the building. So keep all those things in mind when you look for these programs. And lastly, the diversity, make sure that the program, has a well-established resource for you to thrive, and that, even if you might be one of the few minorities in that program, that can actually be a good opportunity for you to take the lead and start initiative that might be good for you and for the program, for the students in the program that are already there, and the ones that are going to come into. So you can start making that change for once. And then another question that you might be thinking is, how do you choose a research advisor? And actually, it's kind of personal because it's something that I'm thinking about right now. And I've been told that it's also one of the most important decisions that you will make in graduate school. And here's some advice that I've heard from people that I've talked to. And one of the most important things is, you want to have an advisor that is supportive, that is willing to support you in your goals or your training, and that it's also available when you need them. You also want to have a good PI that has a good publication record as well, and that will help you while you're trying to draft and come up with your first author manuscript. You also want to have a good role model, just generally, right? You want to have a PI that has positive values, that is supportive of you, and if you want to pursue a career that's outside academia, that they're also going to support you or other lab mates in that endeavor. And you also want to have someone that is collaborative. So your PI might have connections with colleagues in the campus, outside the university, and you want to have someone that will foster that collaboration with others in your project, and also to introduce you to their professional network so that you're able to connect with others and expand your own network as well. And lastly, you want to have someone that is pro-diversity and inclusion. You want to make sure that your PI advocates for diverse students and educates themselves with cultural, gender, and ethical good practices. And most importantly, that your PI is aware of your identities and supports all of them.
I just want to chime in just a second. It's just like, it's going to be so rare to find someone who has all of these, but I will say, as long as you find someone who respects you, your identities, and also I think truly is supportive. I think having someone who is truly sees you for who you are and is really supportive and trying to expand your network, those are the main qualities. And in regards to the last point with Yaniris mentions, that's a really great, like, fantastic factor, but this is hard to see because, a lot of them are performative, no? So I think a really good way to actually seek it out is have conversations with grad students, right? Like, if you're choosing research advisors, connect with them, right? So if you are applying right now, you can talk to them, but also mainly grad students don't lie. So, a really good metric to see if, the potential professor it could be a PI or a mentor, is like really just having more conversations with people like in that lab. So yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Daisy. That was great, really. And one other last thing to consider is just some extra things to keep in mind before you apply to a PhD program that we wanted you to be aware of. Among those is, how many PhD programs should I apply for? If you're thinking about that right now, that we get that question a lot. The idea is that you will apply to as many PhD programs that you would like to be a part of. Again, I want to emphasize this again. You want to check the program website, be very familiar with it, look at the faculty, look at the research opportunities, talk to the students, like Daisy was saying, not only recent students, but also upper year grad students as well that have been in the program for a long time. Have they noticed any changes? Is the program really inclusive? And, ask all those questions away. And again, if you're trying to ask these questions via email, sometimes people are going to be really busy. So just don't hesitate to, follow up again and say like, hey, I just want to follow up on this and that. And by that time, you'll probably get an answer. And then another point is, the cost of the applications. It's generally from $70 to $120 per applications, and that can be a lot. But there are fee waivers available for you, and that you can get those via conferences like ABRACAMS, SACNAS. You can also get those via program websites, or you can even email the program director to request one. And in that email, you can say that you're interested in getting a fee waiver, that you can, send them any materials that they might need to like confirm your financial need, whether that is a FAFSA application or anything else that you might have. And then lastly, when you think about how many PhD programs, just generally, you want to apply to around 10 to 12 PhD programs, and you want to divide that between excellent, good, and safety programs. And you want to, again, make sure that these are programs that regardless if you rate it as excellent or a safety school, you would still like to join and you would like the research there, even if you, at the end of the day, have to go there, right? You just don't want to put a program in your list just because. And then lastly, the criteria you might be thinking about when selecting a program, it could be, the program of study, the research mentors that are available for you, the special programs that they could have, teaching opportunities, the kind of coursework, the location, and the support and diversity that the community has for you. And then one last thing for me is, you will talk about the financial considerations that you need to keep in mind for the interview process. So let's say you submitted your app, you got an interview, that's awesome, and you're getting ready for the interview. For this, we wanted to talk about traveling. The program will pretty much cover your travel arrangement, whether that is through a flight or through a train. They will generally give you money for around $500 for the whole round trip. And sometimes they will schedule the travel themselves, and sometimes you will have to do it yourself. If you have to do it, they'll reimburse you for that afterwards. Then for the hotel, the program will have either a dorm or a hotel for you to stay. And basically, they will also cover your stay during that weekend. But then you will need to use a credit card to pay for any incidental expenses. And that's upfront, the first day, you'll have to give your credit card, and they could charge you anything from $100 to $200. And then by the end, if everything's great in the room, then you'll get those back. But it's something to keep in mind, especially if you have back-to-back interviews, if you were in an interview, let's say in Michigan one weekend, and then the next one you're in Boston, then keep that in mind, that you will have those to go through those charges. And then the other thing is meals. The program will provide you again with meals, but any meal that it's not hosted by the program, you will have to pay. And so for this, you could keep all those receipts and then ask for a reimbursement after the interview weekend, and they should be able to reimburse you. And I wanted to give you a little tip, just in case you might lose a receipt or something. You could use apps. I use Cam Scanner from my iPhone, and basically I just took pictures of all the receipts, made a folder for that particularly interview weekend, and then at the end I was like, hey, ask for a reimbursement in an email, and then just attach that PDF with literally all my receipts. So it's just an extra layer of protection for you in case you lose any receipt, physical receipts. And then for transportation, the program will provide you with, Uber or Lyft codes. Sometimes they will actually have a bus to pick you up. It depends again on the program. But then again, if by any chance you needed to pay up front for an Uber or a Lyft or a cab to get from the train station or from the airport, you need to keep all those receipts and then again, ask for a reimbursement, because they should be able to do that. And then just lastly, for tips, just keep in mind that, even if they're paying for those things might come up, and you might have to pay for some things and then wait for a reimbursement. Reimbursement, depending on the university, can take anything up to literally a month. So do keep that in mind. Try to save some money before the interview cycle, so that if you can, obviously. And then keep track of all the expenses, keep a backup, whether that is an app or just pictures of the receipts. And then always, always, always ask for a reimbursement. And then now for the next part, I'll leave you guys with Aníbal.
Cool, thank you, Danny. I think before we get to the part, there's a lot of really good questions, and I've been trying to be comprehensive answering them. So I guess one question, Danny, that I wanted to gear towards you is, how do you recommend tailoring my application and personal statement for someone without any research experience? It has been 3 years since I got my bachelor's, and I have been working in a career outside of science. So I don't know if you have any comments or...
Yeah, I think it depends. if you have some research experience before, even if it wasn't as recent, I would bring that up. Like I will talk about that experience. If you don't have any research, I think I would reach out to the program and just make sure that it is not an expectations. Like I feel like nowadays, even though it's not like explicitly said in the requirements, they do expect you to at least had one research experience, and that is something, at least for PhD programs, that is something that they're really looking into. I would say also, if you're also trying to further your research experience, opportunities like preps and postbacs can help you to build that, research experiences, and then you can apply after you finish those. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it's really comprehensive. And I think it also brings an important point across, which is the fact that even when you're been out of research, there are ways you can get into research again, if maybe depending on your situation. But yes, research for research-based PhD programs, it's a bit required, and some schools even have thresholds where they ask students to have at least 2 years of research, whether they were like separate or they were continuous. Some schools do have those requirements, and not all of them will be like in the websites, but if you ask, you may get an answer to those. So yeah, there's still a lot of really good questions, but I'm gonna get started with my section, which is how do I apply for a PhD program? And this section will be divided in 2 components. The first will be standardized testing, GRE, and the second will be TOEFLs. And let's start with some announcements, because there are important announcements from the GRE, specifically for those of you interested in math, physics, psychology, and chemistry subject test GREs, which will not be the focus of today's discussion, but it's important to know that these tests recently went through some changes, and it's the fact that they're moving into a computer-based test, meaning that you can take it at home, and there will be more locations where they will be offered, at least for math, physics, and psychology. Additionally, the physics and psychology test will be shortened, so students can take them in 2 hours instead of the 3 hours. And the last really important component is the discontinuation of the chemistry test. If you are applying to a chemistry program, historically, it's been required to almost take these GRE chemistry subject tests. However, in April 2023, ETS discontinued them. And so if you are applying to a chemistry program, this is really important to let your program know. These slides like these, which I will have, I'm just going swiftly over them, but you will get access to all of these slides, and the links with all the subject test information and the announcements are below us. So the second announcement will be going on is that GRE is also going through a change. It's getting shortened. So the 4-hour exam, which historically has been really long, will still be composed of analytical writing, and quantitative reasoning and verbal reasoning. So these 3 sections are maintained, except that they shorten them. So the 4-hour test will now be 2 hours. And the more important thing about this announcement is that they're celebrating in some way these like change in the test, which means they're giving these discounts available right now. So if you do need to take the general GRE, which originally is $220, there are right now discounts available. And these will be different from fee waiver and financial assistance programs, which I will discuss in a bit. Another important thing. So now we can get started with the graduate record examination, or GRE. This 4-hour exam, which is now on September 22, shifting to a 2-hour exam, is required to get into some graduate school programs. But every school has a different requirement these days, and specifically biomedical and biological PhD programs are now dropping the GRE. There's almost 400 programs which are up to date, and I maintained this list with Joshua Hall from HHMI, and basically there's 400 plus programs that you can check out this list, biogre.info, and see if the school that you're interested in and the program you're interested in requires it or not. This is going to be important because the GRE is a big financial commitment. It's a $220 exam with a requirement of $30 per school you send this to. So on the day of the exam, once you take the exam and you finish, you'll get the option to send 4 scores to different universities. And these were going to be free scores, meaning that you can save up to $30 that you would usually need to pay per school. Now, that's really important because if you do know which schools you're interested in, then you can go with those schools in mind so that you can actually include them in the final point. So another thing which is different than what I mentioned earlier, the discounts. There's a GRE test fee reduction program, which you can get up to 50% off. However, there are some caveats to this. You need to show either unemployment evidence, you need to be part of a minority supporting program, or you need to be show a financial need. And all of these will have various like small letters that you need to really dig into. But the more important thing is that these reduction programs will take up to 2 weeks to process your application. So if you send your application for a reduction program today, it won't be until mid-September where you will get an answer to this waiver, and then you can register for the test. So really, long story short, if you check that which schools need or don't need the GRE, that will really help facilitate the process. So we can continue with the breakdown of the exam. Some of you will need to take it, and it's important to know how it's spread out. There's verbal, quantitative, and analytical writing sections. They're graded in a range from 130 to 170, and the writing section ranges from 0 to 6. You won't get your analytical writing section until a couple of days after the exam or weeks after, because they need to manually verify what you wrote, and then the person will grade it. So the point is actually that you will get your official scores for the long GRE. It takes about 2 weeks to get your scores, and the short GRE, it'll take about 10 days. So that's another benefit to this, even though it seems that both cost the same amount of money right now. But going back to the scores, it depends what scores you'll need, will be based on what schools you're applying to. And if you need if you're applying to an English program, you'll be needing a really high verbal score on the 170 range, or a 160, which is an averagely good score. And if you're applying to math programs, then you'll need a high quant score. So that's kind of the breakdown that I obtained from this website, Magoosh, which they also have a lot of resources to study. So we can continue with some TOEFL information. TOEFL, the TOEFL exam as well as the GRE can also be taken at home. And it's important to understand, however, that there are equipment and environment requirements that you need to fulfill to take any of these standardized tests, because not everyone can comply with them because they need really specific software, computers. And so it's important to understand, if you do want to take the test at home, make sure to check these requirements first. Now, you can also apply for the disability accommodations via messaging ETS. However, I actually tried contacting them, and when I emailed them, they gave me a phone number to call to. So it seems that they need you to call to get the ball rolling. And the interesting thing about this is that if we continue, the verification process will take can take 4 to 6 weeks. So it's important to know that if you do need to apply for these supports, it won't be until early October, until when you'll actually hear back for these kind of additional supports. And the links and information are here. So we can continue with the TOEFL, which is the test of English as a first language, and the IELTS, which are two exams that are generally accepted by graduate schools as English proficiency. The TOEFL being the most widely accepted, which is why we're gonna go into that a little bit more in detail today. It seems that there were some questions really interested in what schools require the TOEFL, or if they are requiring for international students at all. And we'll get into that in a bit, but the more important thing right now is for you to just understand that there's two types of TOEFL right now. There's, just as the GRE is shortening its test, there's also a long TOEFL and a short TOEFL, meaning that there's a price difference. One is $255 and the other is $128. And the IELTS continues to be outrageously expensive at $245 to $55. Now, the TOEFL scores are just as the GRE scores. You need to pay for each school you apply to. So if you're applying to 10 schools, you need to separate $200 to submit these scores. But some schools are becoming more relaxed about the English proficiency exam, And I actually compiled a list of about 200 schools with ETS codes that you will get access to. And it's based on it's actually open access. But the important thing about this list is that it actually shows which schools are requiring the test for both international and Puerto Rican students, which are the big questions I did to these administrative assistants I emailed. And on the right, you will see a diagram that after getting 200 plus emails back, I kind of made based on this information, which is if English is your native language, you don't need to take the TOEFL. If it's not, however, you obtained your bachelor's in the US or an institution where the primary mode of instruction was English, then it's possible you may not need to take the TOEFL. But if it wasn't the case, you will need to take the TOEFL. However, some schools are open to conversations and interviews. So if you actually want to talk to an administrative assistant or a professor about this concern of requiring the TOEFL or not, because it is a big financial commitment, you can possibly talk to them and ask them for an interview where they can actually evaluate your English proficiency as well. So this is a case-by-case basis. Now, if you do need to take the TOEFL, there's, as I mentioned, it's divided in 4 sections, 30 points each section with reading, listening, speaking, and writing. There's some cut scores, which are 90 to 100, and around 26 for speaking. This doesn't mean much because basically your English proficiency, it doesn't mean that you're just not gonna get into the program because you did poorly on this exam. But if you do get to grad school, they might require you to take additional English proficiency requirements. The reason for this is that most PhD programs require you to TA. And if you need to communicate to a full English audience of like undergrads, you'll need to have some proficiency. And so those are things that may not be written down in the program, but you should check those details out. There's also Duolingo and the TOEFL International Testing Program, which is another option for China. So we can continue. And really, I wanted to get to this point where there's these 2 now options for the TOEFL. There's the 2-hour exam, and there's the 2.5 hours, and then there's a 1.5-hour exam, which is new. And the more important thing is this dramatic price difference. Even though all the components are still there, you will need to listen, read, write, speak, and then also do a personal video statement. So it's important to also understand there's additional support for these exams. And however, they might be blurry because the TOEFL fee reduction service is designated for high school seniors or those in financial need, needing to apply to universities where TOEFL is needed. So just make sure to check the links and see if you qualify, because the indications are a bit blurry. Now, I just want to pause here and check if anyone has any questions, outstanding questions right now that I may help address at the moment.
Yeah, so someone has asked, are you exempt from the TOEFL if you've done a 2-year master's degree in the US?
Right. Yeah, the chances are that you are exempt. However, in the diagram I showed, there was a detail on the bottom about the master's programs, because it will vary how institutions consider that process and that tenure of those 2 years.
And there is another question, and so I'm not entirely sure, but I'm wondering if you guys know, are there any WES evaluation waivers available for transcript verification for international students? So I'm assuming this is like converting like GPA and scores, right? And your country's like or institution according to the US. And so I'm not entirely sure about that.
Yeah, I don't really know about that, but it's a really important point to make.
Yeah, so we can get back to you on that regarding that, and so we can also put that in like the description and comment section. So we will get back to you on that. So please also email us regarding this question, so we can also, because we also want to know so that we can also, you know, do our research and like ask our current like mentors and community for the answers. But that's a great question. So please email us and jog our memory again with the question, because we would love to also know the answers to that. Okay. Okay, let's go on to the next.
Right. So now we're going to go into the second component of my slides, which are now we're looking at the application timeline. We're still in September. So in 2 days, we'll be in September. We're preparing for GREs, and you're looking up what testing centers are available or if you can take them on your house. Now, October 31 is the latest you can take your tests because you will get the test either a week or in 2 weeks, the official scores. And so if you take it at the end of October, mid-November, you will be able to actually see the scores and submit them to the schools. So it's important to consider if you're thinking of retaking it twice, not to wait until October 31. But if you can begin studying earlier, the better. There's a lot of resources in your local library. Magoosh has a lot of really good resources for verbal studies like flashcards. And the GRE website also has practice exams for the quantitative sections, which may be valuable. Now, do you still need to take the GREs? Well, it will depend. This is a really important consideration. When I was preparing for my grad school applications, I was researching, working, and then I was working 30 to 40 hours just to pay for this exam. So all the time that I spent working could have been time that I could have spent, kind of like working on my personal statement, my research statements, and it's definitely a time commitment that you'll have. So just make sure to consider all your options. And if you really just want to get to this one school that requires a GRE, think about it a lot because it will require you to take time from other things. And so I applied to 10 schools and I submitted the GRE to 10 schools and I got rejected from all those 10 schools. So all that money that I put into that application cycle just went into the void. And it's I can think about it now, but it's important to just think about it at the moment where you all are at. So, yep, if you are taking the test, get a good night rest and just know that the software will also need to be checked if you are taking it at home. So just make sure everything works. And the tests are valid for 5 years. The TOEFL test score is valid for 2 years. So just letting you know. Now, as we continue, you're making this list, which programs require the GRE or don't, and you're also looking into what each program is offering you and what each state where you're going to be at will offer you. There's a lot of considerations, even to the weather, that you'll need to consider. And each school will have different requirements, personal statements, diversity statements, different course requirements. And if your application, you really need to hone each one of these components because there are cases where even getting really good applications documents and packages will allow you to even get fellowships that are internal. So faculty, when they read your application, they can be like, oh, this is a really good candidate for this fellowship. So just make sure to hone all your components and make it complete. Now, when applying to the schools, another cost affiliated is a fees to apply to the specific schools. These, as Gianni mentioned, these can range from $70 to $100. But there are application fee waivers out there for some schools and some programs. This is a hyperlink to a list of these fee waivers, which was made by Científico Latino members, and they're public access to all of you. So just make sure to check that out and start writing your statements as early and often as possible. It took me about 10 versions for my drafts to really get to a place where I felt comfortable when submitting my application. Now we get to the letters of recommendation, and it's bolded in caps and underlined for a reason. The fact of you asking for a letter of recommendation does not mean that the faculty will write a good one. So even just stating that intent of, hello, Mr. X, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation really shows that intentionality. And you do need to educate every letter writer that you will have, but it's important to, as a first communication, put your foot forward with requiring a strong letter from them, because not everyone can really speak to levels that other people may do. So don't ask a professor who doesn't know you well. And if you do need more information, if they do need more information, then provide it to them. But Lacey will touch base a little bit on this later. So we'll continue. And we're getting to October. If you do need to take the GREs again, do them. And if you want to repurpose some of these really great statements that you're working on, you can repurpose them for some fellowships. And we have a lot of fellowship database in our Científico Latino website, which you can check here. Now, make sure to have professors and colleagues look over your statements. And the more eyes, the better, but just make sure to ask them what you need from them and be intentional. It's a cohesive, is the statement complete? So you don't want them to just saying, oh, it's a nice statement, right? Because then it might be a waste of your time and theirs. So just tell them what you need from them at the time you're handing out your statement for someone to check it out. And then just remind your letter writers constantly about their deadlines. It's important to understand that even though some programs have deadlines for us, sometimes the deadline doesn't apply to the PIs, or the deadline is a little later for them. So this will be important a bit later. Now, if you can't attend science conferences, do. SAGNAS, ABRACAMS, BME are really great conferences you can go to, and they have application fee waivers offered in a lot of booths for schools. So even if the school isn't offering a fee waiver when you ask for it, most of the time, if you go to the conference and chat with a representative, they will actually be able to provide you with a waiver. And if you are applying to EEB programs, computer science and psychology, just make sure to start contacting professors, because some programs of these nature will require you to actually contact and know which professor you'll work with as soon as you get to the school. So we're going into November, December. It's almost the final countdown. You need to remind your letter writers of your deadlines. If you do a spreadsheet with all the schools you need to apply to and just give it to them, they will really appreciate this, because they will know, oh wait, I already submitted this school, and this school. So help them to help you in a way. Now, finish your statements, check about the app fee waivers. Really do an intentional effort on this, because if you pay and there was a fee waiver, you're not getting a reimbursement. It's really hard for you to get that money back. So just ask before doing it. And submit applications early. The reason I'm emphasizing this is because I did give my statement to another school with the name of another school. So like one school got my statement with where the application was meant for another one. So if you do this early, you can avoid those bloopers, which no one really appreciates. So yeah, most application deadlines are December 1. So make sure to check those out. And now after you submit it on December 1 or through December 15 almost, you'll begin hearing back from programs. Some programs are knowingly compete with other programs in terms of like the applicant pools that they get. And so the way that they deal with this is by really just kind of giving back answers really quick. So they evaluate applications really fast. Other programs don't feel the need to do that, so they take their time getting back to students. But you should hear back from December to February. If December 25, Christmas time, you still haven't heard back, don't worry. Schools just go on break, and that's the nature of breaks. So people just disconnect and then go back in January to start sending out notices. Now, if you're still in February not sure about application acceptances or invites, then consider a prep program. I did a prep program after I was rejected, and it was the best decision I've ever made. I really got over that slump of getting rejected by all these schools, and we'll have a webinar on that as well. So make sure to check that out. But yes, prep programs are an option, which open from February to March or through April. So grad school interviews, even if you get one, they're not an acceptance. So make sure to shine and just make sure to really do your best in these invites, because they will have limited spots to pay for, and you really just want to give your best shot. And just ask the same question to everyone if you want, because that will also make sure the school you're interested in will actually confirm the values that you're looking for. Now, non-biology programs will notify you of an acceptance via email and have visiting weeks after acceptance to check the school out. So they will vary in terms of how they invite students, especially now that we're coming back from like peak COVID times where no one really knew how to invite for interviews or invite for visits. So now programs are having a slightly variable agenda for that. So on the end where we submitted the applications, and now you'll start hearing back for recruitment weekends from January to March for biological and biomedical non-biology programs from January to April. And then this time is a really good time to interact with faculty and students, just learn about the city and see it for yourselves. Now the PhD program acceptance offers will be spread out from February to April. On April 15, you need to accept or kindly decline programs and pay your taxes as well. So it's just remember to just this day email and contact everyone if you got into the school, and if you didn't get into the school as well, because it was really a process that you went through and you completed it. So you need to really embrace all the responses and all the emotions that you'll have during this time. So just make sure to thank everyone, and even us, email us, and we'll be really happy to hear about you. So yeah. Now I'll leave you to Daisy.
Okay. I just want to answer just one really short question. And this is something that I think we get a lot of questions about, which is like, are there fee waivers for international students? And this is part of really why, for like kind of how broken, right, the system is, because like often a lot of international students also we've come to accept and learn and come to learn from, right, through our program, graduate school mentorship initiative, GSMI, is that like a lot of them don't come from like, you know, I guess middle class or like higher income family backgrounds. And so unfortunately we don't believe there are many fee waivers for international students, and so that's another thing, right, another financial, I guess, barrier on top of, I believe, like vaccinations and visas and things like that. So that's why we are trying to also make all this information very transparent upfront regarding the PhD application process. But for those of you who are a part of our program, GSMI, the cycle, there are a few PhD programs that do offer fee waivers. And so please check that out. Okay, so, and thank you, Jenny and Aníbal, for all the important, information up front. So now we're getting more so regarding the granular details, which is like the components to a grad school application. So this is essentially just a breakdown of all the components. So there's an online application, right? So it's a really cut and dry background, demographics, education, transcript. It could be official or unofficial. Most of them also accept unofficial, which is just basically like regarding what classes you've taken, like your scores. And so we just had a question regarding an international students like transcript, and so we'll get back to you about that, because there is, I believe, like conversion that has to happen, like converting like your country, your institution's scores based on the US system. And then they'll often ask you for CV resume. From my personal experience applying in 2018, so this is 5 years ago, they often ask for resume, but I do know some programs may ask for a CV. And so I'll get into more details about the differences. Then letters of recommendation, of course, and then your personal statement. And so I'll first go into CV resume. So breaking down the CV, so of course you should include your name, contact info, your email, right, your phone number, and your education. So where you got your bachelor's, if you did master's. Research experience should be first and foremost, and relevant employment. So maybe you were a lab tech, right, in your post back years. Then it's publications, presentations, whether that be poster and or oral. And I will want to emphasize as well that you do not need a publication to be competitive enough to get into a PhD program. And I say this from experience as well. I had 0 publication. I also did not go to any national conference until my senior year of college, and that was after I had already applied. And then, of course, teaching experience is really important because, and Jenny also mentioned about teaching, right? So look into teaching requirements in a PhD program, because if you are interested, right, in becoming a PI, right, after you get your PhD, teaching is a huge component to that, no? And also as a PhD student, you will be doing a lot of formal teaching, which is in a classroom, so TAing like undergrads or other grad student-based courses, but also teaching informally, right? So you will be asked to mentor a lot. Your other fellow grad student peers are also training an undergrad or a summer intern, right? Things like that. So teaching is a huge component. And I also want to touch upon an earlier someone who asked a question, you know, what if I did a career outside of science for the 3 years I was out of school? So if there are skills that actually apply to anything regarding a PhD experience, right? But mentoring, communication, teaching, building resilience, all those skills you learn those 3 years, even if it's outside of science, can still be talked about and elaborated, no, in your personal statement. So that is something that is not exactly frowned upon. It's just make sure that you have at least like, you know, 2 years of research experience that you can elaborate on your personal statement. And then you can say, oh, I did 3 years, you know, outside of science, building on these other skills, the softer skills, right? Like communication, teaching, etc. Leadership positions. So again, it doesn't have to be in STEM. Like, you know, I also join a lot of cultural clubs and groups in college. And so for those, you know, just, you know, examples of leadership references. I don't have references, but you can also list down essentially your letter of recommendation writers, people who would vouch for you. And also note that everything should be reverse chronological order. So the most recent should always go to the first and goes to the oldest. So breaking down the CV, right? So again, the very first thing should be your name and education. So Paula is like one of our OG CL volunteers, and she's one of my really good friends. So she stated, okay, well, she is doing a PhD here at Yale, so this should be first and foremost your department, but she also graduated from UPR, Rio address, and so she noted that her major, a bachelor's, and then I know that for certain schools, I remember one school I applied to, they explicitly said do not include a GPA in your resume. So, but I know that most resumes do, or CVs include a GPA, but make sure in the PhD program you're applying to. I remember one program, I forgot which one, but I forgot there's one program that said do not include GPA. Okay. And so, yeah, so then if, you know, if you wish to also include relevant coursework, again, this is not required, but if you are short in space, for example, if this was a resume, which is 2 pages, this is some place that you can probably take out. But if it's a CV, include all the coursework that's relevant, right, to that PhD program. So for Paula, it's epigenetics, microbiome, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Then it's your research experience, which is arguably probably the most important section in your CV, especially when you're applying to a PhD program. I say it's probably most important because this is basically, you know, do you have experience, right? Building your resilience, troubleshooting, working through problems. What are some of the hard skills? Like, you know, so yeah, so then this person has done like real-time quantitative PCR. She's done confocal microscopy, right? IHC, things like that. So these are all kind of like things that you should list down, and also put your project under each research experience, because it goes to show, oh, have you started a project and sought to its near completion or to completion. So most of personally my research experiences, right, were also not just in my home institution, but also like summer internships. And so it's very, very, very difficult to finish a project in like less than 2 months. And so but as long as you can say like, oh, I've started off with this hypothesis, and this is, you know, and I've done X, Y, and Z to address it. And even though you didn't, you know, finish that project per se, you still had some preliminary data. But what's the big final product? A presentation, right? Science communication. So again, it goes back to what I mentioned before, that a PhD is not just hardcore, just like pipetting things like day in, day out, like bench work. It's not that isolated. You have to do a bunch of other things like mentoring, teaching, communicating your science to a bigger audience. And so I would say objectively, right, your research experiences, again, make sure to include location, your department, who your PI was, what was your role in that research experience. So if you were a lab tech or an undergrad summer intern, things like that. So yeah. Next section is teaching experience. So again, going back to what I mentioned, this is probably also one of the really important sections. And so it, you know, I find that a lot of people be like, oh, I didn't TA though. Like my undergrad institution, like part of my graduation didn't require me to TA, or like mostly grad students TA'd, but also a lot of teaching comes informally. So if you've done any tutoring or things of that nature, then those are also some things to include, but this won't make it or break it. So if you don't have any, it's okay. I just want to say that. But you know, if you have any formal, informal teaching experiences, this is some place that you should definitely mention. So for this person, you know, she's TA'd for this biology class, right? So when did she TA for this? She TA'd for this quite often, right? So for 3 full semesters, and how many students that she had to look out for, about 150 students. And so, and this person also showed initiative, right? Some kind of leadership quality, which is that she had to lead and facilitate, you know, smooth discussion sections every single week, but also holding office hours, right? So these are also, this is something that you should include, like not just saying, oh, I TA'd for this, but these are all really necessary details that you can say, oh yeah, like I can, you know, multitask and handle a lot of, you know, pressure, but also different responsibilities, which again, you will have to do when you're a PhD, not just doing your research, but a lot of different other responsibilities that will tap into like your teaching, mentoring, and communication aspects of your scientist identity. Okay, so next section. So after research experience or education, research experience, teaching experience comes leadership, right? It's because, you know, when you're, you know, a PhD student, you know, it's okay. Like in the beginning, you're still kind of like feeling things out and adjusting to the workload and time management, but also, you know, you've come to develop the sense of like, you know, that you know, you're serving, you know, as a leader in some regards in the lab, but this is some place that you can also demonstrate to PhD admissions like committees that you have, again, like grit, right? So so this person, she was a leader in that she was a fellowship committee member and graduate women of science, right? She also facilitated weekly student run neuroscience journal clubs at her undergraduate institution with other grad students, postdocs across multiple departments. And she was also a co-creator for a virtual, you know, VR project film developed by other scientists at her institution. And so, yeah, list the names of the groups, your position, dates involved, and also more importantly, right, like elaborate on the details. And I will want to also again say that it does not need to be STEM related. So for me personally, I was a director of education outreach, right, for the Inter-Asian Council at my home institution. So a lot of that involved like communicating and inviting speakers like for events, right, for my club and for like my college. And so why are those skills, like how does that translate into PhD, right? So for example, you know, what if, you know, your project, you're stuck and you're like, oh, I don't know this technique, but I know that person knows that technique and I want to learn from them. So it's kind of like you're not afraid, right, to reach out to, you know, a collaborator, for instance, or you're not afraid to like reach out and like, you know, ask for, you know, their assistance or to come visit the lab and show you how to do a technique, or you go visit their lab. It's kind of, a lot of it has to do with, again, grit and resilience and initiative to start and or complete, right, something. So yeah, so it doesn't need to be STEM related. Okay, so another section in your CV is presentations, right? So for this is now Rob. So Rob Fernandez, one of the co-founders for CL. So he did, let's see, a poster presentation. So you can see that Rob, right, bolded his name. So for, if this is, you know, your CV, your resume, bold it. And also note down the person who presented. So for me, I know that for a project that I collaborated with someone else, right? She had also presented that post at AgriCamps, but I didn't personally go there, but we're co-op like first on that. So it's kind of like, okay, well, she then, I asked her as her name presenter and by both of my name because that was my CV. So for Rob here, he bolded his name and then also name of the workshop, seminar, and also of course the location as well as the date. So for him, it's a year. So any presentation, so national or an undergraduate conferences, poster or presentation seminars at your undergraduate institution, and summer research programs. And I want to say that I am someone who had no publications when, I submitted my application. I had no national STEM conferences, but I still made it. So I want you to also say, and I also didn't have a high GPA. So I want to say that, the biggest thing is really like your research experiences and, if it comes across like you are resilient and you can think through things and troubleshoot, those are the really, really important qualities that will shine through, despite, right, if you haven't gone to a national conference or despite like you not having publication, which is also really rare before joining a PhD program. Okay, and then lastly is like one of the last things is awards. And so again, this is Rob. And so list all your awards, right? So the name of the award, so for him it was at Yale. And so again, it's like a description of the award, right? And so if you have statistics, so for example, like you are one of the 20 students selected to be part of the Yale Biomed Amgen program out of like about 1,000 applications. That's something that if that is solicited, if that's like given to you, list it. And when was that award given to you? So among these awards is university awards, right? Conference travel awards. So if you have second travel award or Abercams, please do. It's a huge accomplishment. Poster prizes, right? Scholarships and fellowships, and also dean's list. So if your school does like have a role in dean's list per semester, so meaning if your GPA I believe is a 3.5 and up on a scale of 4.0, then definitely list that as well. And the last thoughts on CV, right? So, you want it to be that it's neat. It's something that they're probably going to look at first. And so be consistent with the format, font, and language. Avoid serif fonts. So use sans serif. So like Arial, Calibri. I don't even know if I'm saying these right, but you know what I'm talking about. So Arial, Helvetica, avoid a lot of the scripty fonts for those of you, for people who are dyslexic. Highlight the important accomplishments first, right? Yes, so again, the difference between a CV and resume is that a CV is pretty much like everything. It's like, everything, it's, up to 6 pages, but resume is typically limited to 2 pages max, 1 page if possible. And again, resume is just listing out the relevant experiences. Okay, so now we're going to go into the letters of recommendation. Okay, and so this is where each letter will assert your scientific and personal qualities and your nature of relationship with like that person writing it for you. So going back to what Aníbal has said, he touched upon it a little bit. So it's kind of like, who do I ask, right, for the recommendation letter? So recommendation letters are typically written by faculty members who can talk about your accomplishments, your intellectual potential, and your motivation for, your PhD program or your study. It should not be PIs who've been pretty much like absent, right? Or like you spent maybe like a month in, or like, or shorter in their lives. It's like mentors who have truly seen you grow as a person, who've seen you work through troubleshooting a problem, a struggle, right? Who have seen you grow as a person. They can talk about how your potential to succeed in grad school, right? And as a scientist, like, have they seen you informally mentor someone in the lab? Have they seen you start a project from like start to like near completion? Have they seen you actually go through something? Like, for example, if you don't have something in the lab and you're like, dang, I don't have this, but I'm gonna build it myself. Have they seen you go through that problem, right? Like, kind of, again, the potential, like where they've seen you grow. And so I saw a question earlier about like, oh, what if that PI, right, doesn't really know you, but you pretty much worked with like a postdoc or a senior grad student? That's actually really, really common. And that like you're scared, like, oh, that PI doesn't know you. Then in those scenarios, reach out to the faculty member and be like, hey, I was, X, Y, and Z in your lab for this duration. Can I set up a Zoom call with you or a phone call with you to discuss about my future plans? And oftentimes, your research mentor will probably also assist your PI in writing the letter. And then it's just so that the faculty member typically signs it off. But arrange it so that, your direct research mentor can actually talk about, right, all the things that you've done, and they will work with your PI during that period of time of your experiences in writing your letter. So don't, in those scenarios, by the way, it's actually very, very common, more common than you guys think. And then along with that, right, it's typically best though to ask faculty who know you well. So again, research mentors, department chair, faculty member, a faculty mentor, a summer program research mentor, and then lastly, like the research or honors program directors. So when requesting recommendation letters, right, truly request one at least 2 months in advance. Be very short and direct and respectful, because they often are inundated with a bunch of other things like writing grants, or they have to go and teach a class. They're probably also receiving emails from students. So straight up, right, in the subject line of your email, be like, oh, recommendation letter for PhD program, short and sweet. And so when you're emailing your letter writers, right, you want to list, include as an attachment your resume, a rough draft probably, right, of your personal statement. So if you're asking September, October time, be ready to have maybe like a rough draft of your personal statement. Doesn't have to be clean. It's just so that they could see like what are some of the things that you've talked about, so they can also talk about it as well. So of course, if you mention like your time in a summer program, right, it's probably also like, okay, so Aníbal has mentioned about the program. I'm gonna talk about his experience in my lab during that program, summer program, right? So they can, it's just for them to know what are the points to touch upon. Information to be included in letter, like what do you want them to talk about? So this is really important for those, by the way, who have like low GPA. So for example, if you have a 3.0 and there was a semester where you did really poorly, but then in the future semesters you did amazing. So what happened during that one semester, right? So if there's a PI that who understands and saw that, oh, you were going through a lot of family problems, or like, oh, you were juggling like 4 work-study jobs or 4 jobs while taking classes, while doing research, right? And that would explain. So, PIs are also the people that you would reach out to, be like, oh, this to help explain this discrepancy or whatever, like in your transcript. And then, of course, lists of programs that you're applying to with deadlines. And again, it's okay to send a follow-up or reminder email. And so Paula, she said, dear Dr. So-and-so, hope this email finds you well. And so she's explaining, I want a strong recommendation from this person. And she has applied to 10 grad programs in neuroscience or molecular and cellular biology. And so then she goes, okay, well, the deadline is December 1st. And so thank you for your time and consideration. But for those people, for PIs that you wish to set up coordinate, a meeting with, to be like, oh, can you work with, right, this research mentor that I actually work with? So you can also schedule a phone call or a video chat to kind of explain all of this. Okay, so and lastly, this is the last thing that we're going to talk about in this workshop, webinar, is a personal statement. Okay. And I'll also mention that I will only briefly go through the personal statement, but in our YouTube channel, we have recorded an entirely webinar led by Kathy and Maya and Juan Barajas on personal statements. So they've both given this workshop in the past. And so I'll only go briefly through it, but it's also on our YouTube channel as well. And so, okay, so perhaps like one of the biggest components of your application is perhaps a personal statement, right? So this is the place where you explain how you got interested in science, right? Why you're interested in your specific research field. So if it's like molecular biology and neuroscience, right? Like what were like the research work experiences that led you to this point in time where like I want to do a PhD. What you learned through the experiences, right? So of course, like saying this is what you hypothesized, what you did, what methods or techniques you use, but more importantly, right, your reflection. So if, for example, for a summer program, right, you learn that, okay, well, I learned X, Y, and Z tools, that's great, but what are some of the skills or things that you've taken away from that? So for example, the Biomed Amgen program at Yale, my freshman year in college, that was the very first time I delivered an oral presentation to an audience of just family members of non-STEM scientists. And I felt awesome doing it. And so it's like, oh, I realized like perhaps science communication is something that's for me. So that's one of the reflection pieces that you will probably need to do like at the end of every single paragraph in your personal statement. And then what you plan to do, right, with your PhD in your STEM field. And so again, remember the objective, right? So grad school will open the path to many, many careers, as Yanni has mentioned, not just in academia as a PI, but also in industry, science policy, science communication, that requires a lot of the skills that you learn from your very, very rigorous training. And again, for especially for you guys applying this cycle or the next, important to reflect and really remember why it is that you want to go to grad school, because this is a minimum 5 to 7 year journey. Program qualities, right? So again, like in your personal statement, you know, at the very end of your statement, why does the program appeal to you? And you can talk about like all the things that you've done, right? Research experiences wise, but then it's very easy to just like, you know, copy and paste like everything you've done and send to like 30 different schools. But at the end of the day, right, like programs will have an X amount of funding, right, to give out to certain students. And so they want to know, you know, does Daisy really want to join a community? So typically in the last few sections or last paragraph of your personal statement, really make sure that like, you know, your essay shows that you've done your research, you've done your homework, you know, that you're like, okay, I do want to get my PhD at Yale, because it's extremely collaborative, and I know that it's very interdisciplinary, this program. And this is also the place where you mention 3 PIs very briefly, whose research honestly like interests you in a short sentence why it does, right? So this also goes back to the fact what Jenny has mentioned before, when you're selecting programs and looking at PIs, right? Look at the lab websites, which faculty and what program, and get a sense of which labs you're interested in. And so if it involves you, you know, reaching out to them to talk to them, great, do that. Go for it. And so, you know, for example, like in Young's lab, he does at Yale, he does a lot of viral protein crystallography. So you're like, oh, well, I'm a structural biologist, I love this. And, you know, this is something that, you know, a lab that you can potentially see yourself rotating in, right, when you join the program. And so again, the lab culture and also the PI that you eventually get to know and you'll join honestly has the most important influence on your PhD journey. And it's really important to know, you know, if you're interested in multiple labs in that program. And I really can't emphasize this enough, like your PI and your lab culture really does have the most influence, because you're spending 8, 10 hours, 5 minimum, maybe 5 days a week with the same people and the mentor, right? So all the qualities that Johnny has mentioned way back early in this webinar really do, you know, think about that and reflect. Okay, and then a strong personal statement, honesty, right? So you know, this story of yours should show your genuine self, avoid metaphors. The reader should be able to get a sense of who you are, right? So of course, avoid generic sentences like I love science, science is so cool. And if you do write, you know, include certain sentences like this in your first several drafts, that's okay. That's why they're drafts, right? And you get people to also edit and give you feedback. So, you know, getting something down first on the paper is really hard. So if this is what helps, then do go for it. But eventually the draft of your personal statement, the finalized version, should actually reflect on who you are, what you want to be, and what were the skills that you've learned in various research experiences that kind of like made you think, this is why I want a PhD, and this is why I want to become, you know, a science, you know, being science policy or something like that. With that said, right, someone who can also give you critical feedback will be the professors, will be the mentors and peers. The more eyes, the better. However, not too many eyes though, not too many eyes, because everyone will have something to say, right? So I would say get your PI, maybe get the postdoc or your senior grad student who mentored you, maybe your peers, right? Or if you guys are in college, maybe someone else is going through the same process. Get them to read it and be like, hey, do you understand what I'm writing about? And do you get a sense of why it is that I want to do a PhD? So this is definitely like much, I would say really helped me, and also honing my writing skills is having people who are really good at this, right, in science writing. So I got my undergrad PI, the postdoc in my undergrad lab to actually read my personal statement. Okay, so more tips, proofread many times, right? Check for typos, repeating words. This is what Aníbal has mentioned. Make sure if you're applying to Yale that your personal statement says Yale and not Johns Hopkins, right? Make sure the names are correct. You know, you are going to be able to reuse your personal statement, but the last paragraph again should be should be showing your PhD program. I've done my homework, my research. This is why I want to go to this program. It's just probably the last paragraph that will often change across your statements, but the bulk of your personal statement should be the same. So you can reuse it, changing a few details, right? So again, professor's interest, program name, but generally make sure everything else is like correct. Again, your personal statement is a chance for you to convey your personality and passion. It's not just super cut and dry. So use this personal statement space wisely. And so also double check each PhD program's personal statement requirements. So the shortest that I've seen was Penn. I believe that's 500 words. And the longest, I don't remember what it was. It was like 2,500 words, something like that. And so always start with the longer versions, and each version that you make of your personal statement draft, keep each version, because you never know if you're going to go back to a longer one and be like, oh, that program allowed me to, like, write more. So each iteration you go through, keep all the iterations. And then the third point, maintain verbosity. So like convey a message clearly, concisely, no irrelevant details. This is an exaggeration, like, how much you love knitting, but if it doesn't go straight to the point, you don't need to mention it. And then lastly, right, do not make excuses or focus on a negative aspect. So decide whether there's a glaring issue that needs explanation. So this goes back to my earlier point about really making use and thinking about people who you contact for your letter of recommendation, right? So if you had a semester of like grades for a specific reason, and there's a professor, like someone who actually like saw you through that process, like have them, like, because your personal statement is so limited in space, but letters of recommendation writers, like they can also explain that, use their space to explain like why it is, right, that your grades are so low this semester. But as long as like you explain, okay, well, I was juggling so many things at a time, or, oh, there was a problem in my family life, personal life that made me just really distracted mentally, that is not something to be frowned upon. It's just something that you can probably use the space to explain. And again, don't dwell on it, right? Be like, oh, like I went through this process, this struggle. However, I sought to sought the summer's experience, or like I wanted to explore X, Y, and Z. So don't dwell on negative, but like switch it back and transition into something that was positive, like, oh, like this negative mindset into a positive mindset. So again, like you can describe how you can compensate for negative factors, right? What makes you, again, ready for grad school is like having a few bad grades. So this, again, you can say, like, if you have like a low GPA in this one semester, you can say, well, I've juggled so many different jobs, but again, that goes to show, oh, like, Aníbal can like multitask, right? And so this is going to be a really important skill to have. And so even though it came out to be, let's say, like a low GPA, but that goes to show that you have grit again, right? You have grit, and you can transition from a negative to a positive mindset, which is actually very important in grad school. And yeah, it goes to show, like, yeah, so add about how you overcame the obstacle, right? And what you've learned from that experience. And it goes back to reiterate my earlier point. I was a bit ahead of myself, but again, faculty members writing your LORs can support your story. So again, focus on the positives. And that's it, guys. So I see, yeah, so we're open to questions. I know that this is a very lengthy webinar, but let's just spend this maybe 10 minutes or so, 5-10 minutes, just answering some questions. Okay, so I see one let's see, really important question. This is something that is actually pretty common. So someone has asked, what should we do if our PI wants us to write our own letter of recommendation? Which again is more common than a lot of you guys may think. And then again, the question also continues, it says, are there any drafts that we can use and adapt with our own experiences amongst the resources we have access to? But okay, so what should we do if our PI wants us to write our own letter of recommendation? So Aníbal, Jenny, do you guys have any input?
Yeah, so there's actually this will vary, because sometimes PIs ask postdocs, sometimes they ask ourselves to write the letters. And there may be drafts that you can actually get for adapting this, and it may be really important to adjust accordingly, because even though the PI will not write everything that you're going to give them, it's important to give them a really strong starting point. And I think I have had to write my own letters of rec, and it's definitely strange. But even though I have sent it to my PI, he has done whatever he wanted with it. So I think in a way, yeah, I think you can write anything you want, and they will adjust it. But yeah, as for specific drafts you can use, there may be resources online. So if you want to email us, you can please go ahead and do that, so we can start looking for some resources.
Yeah, I will also want to add to that point and be like, I'm like also iffy on this situation, because I find that it makes us really uncomfortable, and that we're writing our own letter of recommendation, we're hyping ourselves up, and it's like, is it really my responsibility though, right? And so that's an unfortunate, I think, position that a lot of students often have to be put in. And but much like what Annabelle said, I've also had to write my own letters of recommendation for like fellowships, and so I just like pretty much put like the skeleton of it and be like, hey, this is just a rough draft, and this is something that these are the things that I want you to include. So I just made a skeleton of it, but I would be explicit and be like, oh, could you also help edit it? But I've laid out the majority of it. Or also, I would say, like, perhaps like don't be afraid to maybe ask that professor for like an example as well. And I've did that as well. It's like, oh, I've never had to write one. Could you send me probably a letter of recommendation that you had to write maybe for someone else? But and again, it's a really bad position, I would say, like to be put in. But if they asked you for a letter of recommendation, I think it's only fair to be like, oh, I kind of need assistance, and if you have like a template or something like that. And yeah, so then also, if any of you guys are struggling with this as well, please also email us, because this is a really common situation, more common than you guys might think. So yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out and email us about this. Okay. Is there anything else that you guys see?
I think regarding the funding experience, it's one question that says, what is your funding experience like? Do you tend to get stipends on time? Is it enough to survive and slave? I've heard some horror stories. The truth is, it will vary across programs to programs, and even when you're in a program and you switch from one fellowship to another, or from a TA position to a fellowship, sometimes documents don't get sent at the right time, and there are instances where I've actually had to like take from my own money, my own savings, to like supplement some weird things I did with the payroll that month. So even when you think things are good, they can go south. Most of the time things are okay. That's like a 1% of the time situation. As for the funding experience, it will vary, and savings, it will vary across programs. Mostly biomedical programs are really well funded, but this does vary across states with inflation and everything going on around the world. Things are more expensive in a way, and yes, it may be challenging in some places, but I think in the general sense is that the funding experience, it has been good, at least personally, for me. But I don't know about other places.
Yeah. I so funding experience also, yeah, exactly what Anna was mentioning, it really depends. And I think the most important thing is it enough to survive or save? And the stipend that you get should always be enough for your live, like food expenses, but also living expenses, right? So it's stipends could be higher in one place or lower than the other. So you can imagine if you were to get into a program in New York City or San Francisco, the stipends clearly should be some of the highest, no, of other places because it's so expensive to live there. And so I will want to say, like, I live very comfortably. And so I think also for people who come from like low income family backgrounds, like for me, when I got my stipend, I was like, dang, this is the most amount of money I've ever had. Like my parents like didn't make this much. And so, but you start to realize like, oh, like a lot of it goes into rent and some is just for food, but you should be living on it comfortably, I would say. So I don't think you should worry too much about having enough, but of course, like, saving here and there, like meal prep here and there, things like that. And so if you are worried about also like expenses, like a lot of PhD programs will also have like tutoring opportunities. Yeah. And so
Yes, on that same note, Daisy, there's a question about Yale and if the students are funded through the whole program.
Yeah. Yes, they are. Yep. Yes, they are. Okay.
I actually had, sorry, I was answering another question in the Q&A, but I actually had something to add on the previous question. I think great question. I think you could actually check for programs that you are considering or are applying to if they have unions. Like I know here at Harvard, there is a formal union that has been approved and inscribed and whatever. And basically this union, if you decide, even if you don't decide to join the union, even if you come as a student and you don't pay the monthly dues to join the union, you have rights, and the union has a lot of financial support that you can apply. Like, let's say you had a dental issue or a healthcare issue and you had to pay for a copay, or you had some extraordinary financial situation, you had an emergency where something flooded in your apartment and you lost everything, you can apply to these funds and they can help you. And so I think one good thing that you can do right now, there are a lot of places that have started to unionize. Check the programs, check if there's a union, and make sure that you contact them and ask them what kind of support the union has for, incoming students.
Definitely. Okay. Let's see. I guess that's pretty much it. And so for those of you who want to be involved and want to ask more questions regarding like support through us, like please again email us. But everything is also listed on our website as well. And so for GSMI program, the application has closed back in June, and so it's already well underway. But then definitely please check out like our other webinars that we've uploaded onto YouTube, because again, also for our personal statement as well, where we dive deep into differences between the personal statement, the statement of purpose, and the diversity statement. Everything has been uploaded and recorded on each channel. And so yeah, so if you guys have any more questions about that, and a lot of you guys are also international, so we've also had recorded webinars on like how to apply to US grad students as an international student, also on YouTube channel. And so definitely check that out. And we also have an international student guide on our website as well, so feel free to look over everything we have on our website, because everything is open access. And but if you guys still have questions, do not hesitate to reach out to us. We're like really happy to answer, and really glad that you guys have attended. So okay, anything else, guys?
Just remember to, I guess, during this application season, vouch for yourself and never think any questions that you are doing to any administrative assistant or anyone is too much. Really, it won't affect your application. Just make sure you stand up for yourself and you ask what you need to ask. So don't be afraid of that.
Ask questions, ask for fee waivers. The worst they say is no, you can't, but that's the worst, right? So ask for fee waivers. If you need help with anything, ask anyone in your lab. Also email us. Please do that. And everything is open access on our website as well, on YouTube. So I'm echoing what Aníbal said. So yeah, advocate for yourself. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Alrighty. That's it. Okay. Take care, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming. And Aníbal, Yanni, you guys are awesome.
Yeah.
Bye.